You're listening to The Adventuring Party. Talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Savage.
I'm Shane.
And I'm Conrad.
Oh my... and I've got Mr. Gin with me. Who do you have, Conrad?
For my health on the vitamin gin.
Two-headed ogre, that one, isn't it?
It is the two-headed ogre.
How about you, Shane?
I am weak and I have gone for a weak Polish vodka.
There is nothing weak about vodka.
Strunk. Poland strunk.
Shane's drunk.
Shane's drunk.
So we can't use any of this, right?
Of course we can.
Yeah.
We don't advocate drinking, we just practice a lot of it. This week we are here to talk about a couple of things, but this largely arises from most of us listening to a podcast about purple worms. The purple
worms.
Where did we find them?
We found them on Anchor.
Oh, they're producing on Anchor.
They're producing on Anchor, and they're on, I think, they're on iTunes as well.
They get themselves around it. I found them on Spotify. So,
okay.
Much like the Adventuring Party, found at almost all good podcast locations. Now, they did an episode about Vancian magic, which is the sort of the underlying kind of rules of magic, ideas behind how magic works that underpins a lot of traditional fantasy magic settings. Shane?
It is mostly heavily associated with D&D. Actually, here's a good question. Has anyone actually read the works of Mr. Jack Vance?
Undying Earth, isn't it?
Yes, I've read Jack Vance.
I've only ever read his sci-fi stuff, so I haven't directly seen the Dying Earth stuff. But these days it's mostly known as a D&D thing, and it rarely shows up outside of D&D except as parodies of D&D.
Yeah, that's sort of, I've only I've run out of spells for the day sort of thing, as the wizard hides behind an orc. Anyway, the Purple Worm guys covered it, and we thought there was enough meat on that bone that we'd give it our own spin.
Yeah.
And we'll be doing a shout-out to the boys across the water. They're an English podcast.
They are an English podcast, indeed.
Which we can't hold against them, because we're an Irish podcast. We would simply be struggling to drown each other.
Yes.
But so Vancian magic, it is the grand dam of magic systems as far as role-playing games are concerned.
So, just to clarify, if you're not familiar, you're almost certainly familiar with Vancian magic, though you may not be familiar with hearing it described as such. The idea of Vancian magic is that you are a wizard, you memorize a certain number of spells. Once you utter or cast the spell is gone from your memory, and then you have to sort of go off to a spell book and sort of insert it back in your brain. The better, the more powerful a wizard that you are, you can memorize more spells. So that is taking in away from the Dying Earth books of Jack Vance, but that is explicitly how spells are organized in D&D, usually.
Yep, levels on levels.
If it hadn't been for D&D being so popular, I don't think we would even remember the concept, because the number one thing you'll see in almost any fantasy game is how it is not D&D and does not use silly Vancian magic, and it makes sense. And look at this evocative world building I did.
Did you say it makes sense?
Well, no.
That any competing formula of magic would make sense. Like, none of it makes sense. It's called magic for a reason.
Yes.
If it relied on sense, it'd be called something else, like science. Hey, it's like we practiced that bit.
Yes, it is.
Anyways, to your point.
Well, my point is that it is, for something so ubiquitous and powerful in actual play use, it seems to be. Certainly, a lot of people have invested in making it seem like it's controversial and weird and incompatible with proper fantasy role-playing, whatever that is. And you'll see an awful lot of internet ink spilled decrying its illogic.
Shane, are you suggesting that people are enjoying themselves wrong?
Well, the internet would certainly have you believe this.
Danger. So I think for me, Vancian magic is... It's kind of interesting because it arises from a literary work where presumably Jack Vance was writing it and going, I just don't want... Actually, why did Jack Vance decide to go with that? In a sense, is it to simply limit the power of these characters in his world?
I think it was... Well, my impression, as I say, I haven't read the actual Dying Earth series, but the impression I got is that he was actually trying to make the spells seem more impressive. The idea being that even the most powerful of the wizards in Dying Earth would only have 3 or 4 of these spells inside their mind at one time, and each was this sort of almost like a demon bound into thought form, and releasing it would inevitably alter the world and hasten the said dying of the earth.
Demon's an interesting way of thinking of it. Algorithm is another.
Yeah,
We live and die by algorithms now.
I have actually seen an awful lot of there are defenders of fancy magic, and they would often describe the idea of the spell almost as a living thing, and the wizard's brain almost like a trap.
Well, on that note, I don't like Vancian magic as a game mechanic. Now, I know that was the attitude taken by most of the Purple Worms, but Dave and Colin and the boys did like. But I think it has. I think they're basically, when you're looking at an RPG, you've got 2 kinds of magic systems. You've got the codified magic system and the uncodified magic system. And a codified magic system would be something like D&D, Savage Worlds, Pathfinder. And an uncodified system would be something like Mage, the Ascension, Sorcerer, that sort of thing. And there's a lot of advantages to a Vancian magic system because it pushes a lot of power to the player. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if any of you follow the YouTube channel, the animated spellbook by Zubaji.
Yeah,
like it leaves that room for a lot of ingenuity, because the player has this menu of options that he can put together in a variety of different ways. So that there's while
in Vancian magic.
In Vancian magic, yes, because if you look at particularly the animated spellbook, Zubaji, the chap behind that, thinks very carefully about D&D spells and how they can be used in new or interesting ways. And that's something that you can only do when something is codified. Everything is known, and there's room for ingenuity there because it's not reliant on the GM, or DM in the case of Dungeons and Dragons, because the uncodified magic has to be negotiated with the GM, and so that there is always a block there. You can't, as a GM, really be surprised because if something happens in your game, you've agreed to it. A player who is using Vancian magic has a list of options, and how they put those options together is entirely up to them. Now, it's not the kind of game that I like, but I can see a lot of benefits to it. Now, it could feel procedural and it lacks a certain pizzazz, but there's with so many different moving parts. I mean, how many D&D spells are there? There
far too many, but that's another.
Yeah. I think I heard someone say 260 in the 5th edition book.
Just before we go any further, what I did want to say about Vancian magic, as in my initial sort of bloom of thought, was that it surprises me just how well it suits being a codified system of magic for a game that Jack Vance's writing was preceding and presumably obviously inspired.
Yeah.
This idea that there were, you had a certain number of shots in your locker, and you had to really pick and choose as to what you could keep in your wizard brain at any one time. Like if you had to sit down and come up with a way of balancing the power of spells versus, fighters and rangers and all that other stuff, like Vancian magic is a bit of a gift to a game designer to begin with, at least way back in the mists of the 70s when all this stuff was sort of boiling around in Gygax and Arneson's head.
It's certainly, I think, works very well with the type of gameplay that Gygax and Arneson were known for, in the concept of you can have your spells written out on like little pieces of card, just kind of as you use them up, crumple them up and throw them away. And they ran a very resource-based game where it wasn't so much that every fight was this big epic fight. It was more that every fight was a chance to lose precious resources, spells, potions, hit points, and all these other things. And therefore, in that thing, a system where you have so many spells and you have to be very pernickety about how to use them, works very well with that.
You were playing a horrible guessing game as well, weren't you? When you were sitting down at the start of your game session, I've memorized these spells today. Hope I'm near a source of water so I can manipulate water. And if you don't end up near water, it's a spell slot that's just taken up.
Well,
you have very little to go on.
You're adding a sort of a level of gameplay there, because you're trying to read the situation, and you're trying to sort of adjust your approach accordingly.
it could be almost like Batman filling out his belt of tricks.
Yeah, Batman's advantage is he's a sorcerer. He can access any trick at any time.
Yeah.
The poor old magic users in the sort of the initial Vancian system may not have been given an awful lot to go on, because we know what GMs are like. You kick in the dungeon door, I'll decide what's there when I'm good and ready, or I've decided, but it's behind my screen and you don't find out.
Yes.
I mean, dungeons in that sort of early Gygaxian era were black boxes. You didn't know what was in the dungeon. That was kind of the point. So how do you prepare a spell list? So I'm going from liking it in a certain sense to there's inherent flaws in Vancian magic as it was.
Less of a flaw and more of a feature, I think, because you're sort of going, you can't, you don't have a universal solvent. You know, every problem isn't a nail that you can hammer with your particular magic. I mean, one of the things that Shane brought up there reminds me of something that Colin from Spy Pit, who was also one of the Purple Worms, mentioned on his podcast, was a young chap that he knows who plays a wizard in a 5e game and has printed out all his spells on cards, puts them in card collectors, and has a little sort of ring binder folder, and turns up for games in his little Hogwarts wizard's robes that he got. And has his spell book, and
Well,
I just think
That's a very fatherly side.
I think that's delightful.
How old is this kid?
I don't know. I presume somewhere like 9 or 10 or something.
Allowable.
Yeah.
That's not as cute when you're
But
18.
But that does raise the point, is that one of the things about the Vancian system is that it sort of requires a bit of investment in it to get the most out of it, and therefore it's one of those systems that's naturally going to create fans of itself, because there's no better way to create hardcore fans than to make people work to figure something out.
Oh, well, I mean, you have to put in that investment. You have to learn the spell book, you know, look at your options, and then sort of advance accordingly.
So D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, all these games that sort of adopted Vancian magic, of course, it's not the only system of magic that tends to exist. Sorcerers in particular, Spring Grinders, they get a much more free-form version. They've had psionics, monks get access to some spells, right?
They have key points which are spent to activate bonus powers. You know, my fist makes an energy fist fly across the screen.
Paladins and clerics have a sort, and rangers to some extent have a very Vancian-esque approach, but nothing is quite as strict as the wizard.
It's become less strict as editions have gone on. There's always been a sort of counterbalance between whether each class should have the same basic system, like all magic works on this slots in your brain system, or if different classes should have their own approach to the whole thing.
I think there's a lot of meat still on the Vancian bone. You know, and lots of people say, oh, here's a better system, here's something more free-form, and the points buy stuff from World of Darkness, which I played a mage game, or played as a mage, and had great fun playing with, you know, I've got certain levels of stuff, what can I pull off? And there is negotiation. But, I mean, there's lots of reasons why a GM can turn around a Vancian system and say, oh, well, it doesn't work for this, that reason. Anyways, anti-magic field,
Yes.
wrong day, sod you.
Yes.
So I think that's all, that danger is always there. But, oh boy, where did I start with this? Thank you, Mr. Gin. What I would say is that, oh no, I've completely lost my train of thought.
Should we
Moving
Where did
rapidly
I,
on.
no, hold on. Where did I start on this one?
I don't remember.
You were talking about other non-Vancian magic systems.
Plenty of meat on the bones still of Vancian magic systems, because I don't think, outside of literary works, a lot of game systems have really looked at some of the ideas that are also in Jack Vance's work. Like that idea you mentioned, Shane, of this thing almost being a living spell entity infesting a wizard's head for
Yeah.
the day. Now, what if, while it's in your brain, you're getting something out of that, sort of a secondary buff thing, or a demerit, something like that. That's all there that could really change how you feel about
that's one of
spells
the
you're
things
stuffing in your cranium.
I think that's a really good idea, and I've actually been, wondering about this idea. The idea that you could have a spell prepared and it gives you like a minor power, and then if you cast it, it has a really big power. Like
some cool ideas, there's some cool build options.
And then if you could have a system whereby you could try using it more than just a cantrip, but that leaves a risk of it accidentally escaping. So you could just say, I'll try to light someone's cigarette from half a mile away and accidentally fireball them.
Okay, yeah, so, the sorcerer kind of takes in some of that unpredictability.
That's true.
But I do like this idea that you're not wholly in charge of all the things that are in your head.
Well, that's a thing that I really like, because one of the things that sort of I find myself, because I sort of don't come from a Dungeons and Dragons background, I come from a Call of Cthulhu background, is that magic, my archetypal wizard is Faust. It is not Merlin. Okay, these are not kindly old men with white beards who live in towers, sort of dispensing magic items to a grateful public. These are lunatics who live at the edge of damnation, sort of wrestling with the very fabric of reality. So and there is a something to be gained from the sort of the negotiated magic system. Like Mage, or
thematically, it certainly hits that bar a lot better than...
Absolutely. But there's some games, like, for example, Cthulhu or Stormbringer, which was the old, which was what Elric used to be called. And it had a magic system that was very similar thematically but not mechanically to Legend of the Five Rings, because Stormbringer magic was almost exclusively based around summoning and binding demons, and you would have to negotiate with these monsters, get them to agree to do something, offer them something so they would do it, overpower them with the very force of your will,
wrestle them into the bottle.
And Legend of the Five Rings has that with the Shigenja, where they're making deals with elemental...
Again, Faustian.
Yeah. Less so in Legend of the Five Rings.
And a much greater opportunity to roleplay.
Absolutely.
Because I've never liked... I mean, one of the things against Faustian magic is one of those things you said, that it's, in a certain sense, it is a known entity. Like, there's nothing... You just uncork Fireball, put Fireball on the table, and move on to the next round. And it lasts for X number of... It's not...
Yes.
Fireball is never suddenly going to swirl up into a vortex and demand someone's head for dinner.
Unless you're a wild magic sorcerer.
Unless, of course.
But yeah, that's a good point, is that there's a sort of tension between predictability and utility versus interestingness.
I think you can have the best of both if you sit down and do some work.
I suppose it depends on how much magic you want in your game, because the magic as it is in Cthulhu, it's rare, it's incredibly dangerous, it's very rarely a known quantity, in that you don't really know what's going to happen until you cast the spell in the first place. That's assuming that you've transcribed it correctly from the book Bend in Human Skin. It is a much more dangerous prospect. And this actually refers back in some ways to what was a more foundational text for me, rather than Dungeons and Dragons, was Advanced Fighting Fantasy Dungeoneer. Was they had a thing called the Oops table, which was you knew a number of spells, but you could cast those spells all the time so long as your stamina held out. But each time you cast a spell, you had to roll. And if you fumbled that roll, you rolled on a table and terrible, terrible things could happen to you.
And I'm pretty sure most DMs had their own customized...
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a wonderful, wonderful Russ Nicholson illustration of a sorcerer just after he's made a complete dog's breakfast of a spell, and it's just this town in Nowheresville, Alanzia somewhere, and it's just a just two smoking boots. It's great. And Stormbringer, because the demon could break free and just eat your soul, had that, and I really like
well
that.
in the form of paradox.
Exactly.
It is lacking in the way that D&D used Vancian magic. Now, of course, I mean, as Jack Vance wrote it, magic was a bit weird.
Yes.
It wasn't anywhere near as codified as it became as it was applied as a system. So we can't really
Lay that at his door.
Yeah, we shouldn't besmirch his good name.
Yeah. Well, I think again, a lot of it is just that D&D worked better when effects were usually but not always predictable, and a given character could be relatively certain that this spell would do this and this spell would do this, and that it was only in the I say that and then I remember all the various many monsters that are just immune to spells or eat spells.
Don't go down the exception hole. Just stay on the top level. With us.
Stay on target. Stay on target.
But yeah, so it's sort of a gameplay. It's sort of a gameplay compromise. Is that we could make that all of these spells have a little D100 table of different things that go wrong with them, or extra right that, or just completely different. But for the purposes of gameplay, and this is the kind of gameplay that gets ironed out over millions of games played by thousands of people over 4 decades. It was just simpler to say the spell does this, and if there's something weird about it, the GM will work out the difference.
Yeah, you're having to balance computation costs against getting it done, and the spell lists are a codified version of the Vancian system. The other one of the other component, the component part of it has sort of been lost along the way. You needed to have certain things to cast.
Yes.
Certain spells in the Vancian system, if I recall.
Yes.
And that's kind of lost its way now.
Shane, you're better on D&D than I am. I think D&D still has spell components, doesn't it?
It does, but the default is that only expensive spell components really matter, and if it's just a cheap, like if it's just like the
an ear of corn, forget about it.
Yeah,
let's say
it's a spider leg and glue that you have to do the Spider-Man spell. You can either do that, or you can just have your magic wand, or
They did a lot of hand waving away for the hand waving.
Oh dear.
Well, the problem is that they. I think an awful lot of the problems with the spell with the Vancian magic system can just be down to a lack of justification. Like, there's a very obvious reason why you use spell components. Maybe not the particularly punny ones that they picked for the first edition Player's Handbook, but spell components as a way to, sympathetic to the right magic wind, or something that helps twist reality. Those would make sense, but
sort of 'tis Rosemary, that's for remembrance sort of thing.
yes, exactly.
I think it's just, again, computation. Like, how much character sheet do you want to give over to a big bag of junk?
Yeah, and
I don't know. I have a very, very fond place in my heart for the old sorcery magic system, which was used in the Fighting Fantasy game book, the sorcery series, the Fighting Fantasy game books.
which I believe is available in app form and is quite.
Don't get them started.
They're so good. But you had these in the game. You had to memorize these 3-letter codes.
Yeah.
And for some of those spells, you needed components, and you needed to remember which components you needed to attach to which codes. And oh my god, when you actually got that right, and I was playing this as a sort of a very sickly 13-year-old, when you got that right, you just felt like a wizard. It was so good.
Yeah, but here's the thing, as I don't think everyone who played a wizard wanted to feel like a wizard. I think a lot
Or a
of them
stock manager.
Yeah, I think a lot of them wanted to feel more like Superman or Dr. Fate. They didn't want to cast spells. They didn't want to memorize spells. They wanted to have magical powers. And the distinction of what the value of all the trappings of Vancian magic were sort of lost on them, and this is where you get the slow grinding away of the unique features of Vancian magic over the editions. And
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, so let's ask this question. Vancian magic, still fit for purpose, or, I mean, that grinding away of features, is that actually inevitable, given how it comes from a place that wasn't necessarily thinking about playing games? We've had a lot of contenders for the throne since. Or are there things about Vancian magic that we should continue to use and explore? Is there a future for it in future editions of D&D and other fantasy and magically sort of inclined games? We'll go with Conrad first. No, we'll go with Shane first.
we're so organized.
Okay, we'll go with Conrad first.
I think if this is the sort of thing you like, this is exactly the sort of thing that you like. And it has the advantages. We know it is playable. We know it is a known quantity, that it is a system that has been thrashed out over a period of decades. It has its advantages, it has its disadvantages. So long as you go into it with your eyes open, I see absolutely no reason why you wouldn't want to use it. It tends not to be the kind of game that I want to run, but I see absolutely no reason why people shouldn't use those tools. They seem to be very good tools if that's the job that you want to do.
Shane.
Vancian magic works, but I think there's a better version lurking in the back of the minds of a lot of creative GMs. We've discussed one option with this whole throwback demons in your head version, but I think if someone was to really pare down to what about the Vancian system clicks in their world, their setting, and don't worry about there's a goddess of magic who sorts it all out in Forgotten Realms. That's just sort of a hand wave. If you want to get the most out of a Vancian magic system, you have to build it into your setting and figure out the implications and what makes it cool, what makes it unique and interesting. And but mechanically, yeah, it works, and it makes sense for the kind of game that D&D is.
I think Vancian magic is old and tired, and like all old, tired things, it probably holds a great deal of worth that no one's yet explored. And shove, a gin in its hand, and revitalise it, and see if you can remind it of why it was great. Then give it a slap in the ass, push it back onto the battlefield, and watch it blow up. That's a strange way of saying, I think it's still got a place. It is now part of a constellation of competing magic systems. And the beauty of that is that it has a flavour of its own, and it has examples to work against. Mm-hmm. If you look at the history of magic in the real world, and that might sound like a very silly thing to say, but we have Wiccan, we've got...
You're a wizard, savage.
Yeah, we've got Aleister Crowley, we've got the Enochians, we've got chaos magic, we've got Egyptian schools, the Golden Dawn, Golden Circle. Go look at your Yeats history. He's a wild guy.
Golden Dawn.
Golden Dawn. If you look at all of these, and sort of these were very different ways of interpreting a kind of a spiritual, magical world, that you could do well to draw from all of these sorts of different ideas and find systems to interpret or incorporate. Vancian magic feels a lot like that. It's a very well thought out, in many ways very codified system that is yet to be fully, I think, exploited. And we're 50 years on from Jack Vance.
But yeah,
I like to round up. But that's a lot of meat still in that bone. There's still plenty of unfilled pages in that spellbook. So I'm looking forward to seeing Vancian magic in future editions of D&D and in other places. I want to see it as a pillar of magic. There are definitely a few others that could possibly even be fleshed out to the same degree in the future. Mm-hmm. I think keep it. But if you're going to keep it, look after it, love it, refurbish it, and make it work. Mm-hmm. Anyways, that's I think that's probably it for this week.
We've used all of our podcasting slots. We need an 8-hour rest.
But we will come back with a new set of opinions selected for the specific encounter, and we hope that you will join us here. The Adventure Party is brought to you by a collection of lunatics and misfits podcasters of all stripes who have collectively fallen under this banner over the course of over a decade now. You can find us on Facebook, on Spotify, on Apple iTunes podcast place. We're on Libsyn at adventureparty.net. You can find ways to contact us in most of those venues. You can contact the party. It's party at adventureparty.net, where we get our emails. If you want to shoot us any sort of message through Facebook, can you record messages on Facebook?
I don't think you can record messages on Facebook.
Get on that, Zuckerberg.
But I would just like to say that Vancian magic clearly has some use. So, snooks to you, purple worms.
Yeah, thanks guys for putting this one out here. We hope you hear this at some point. We'll be reaching out to Purple Worm guys. That's not the only podcast I've enjoyed this week. Conrad, you've launched your own podcast.
Yes, sort of more by accident than design, but you'll find it on Anchor and hopefully on Apple iTunes relatively shortly.
It's on Spotify.
It's on Spotify. It's called Send 3 and 4pence, and it is generally a podcast about books, gaming, and the law.
So go and listen to the guy who started 5 minutes ago. Go back and listen to our archive stuff that stretches back a decade into the past. If you like anything you've heard or are going to hear, listen to Purple Worm guys. They're great as well. I believe they got started sometime last year.
Yep.
Go and listen to these great gaming podcasts. Have a listen to us. But please don't listen on your own. Share it with a friend. Take it on the bus. Play it at the top of your phone speaker's range. Bring it into public bathrooms and sort of leave it playing while you do your business. Accost strangers on the street. Demand that they take one of your earbuds, shove it in their ear, and listen to these podcasts. But whatever you do, do we have subscriptions? Subscribe, make comments, leave comments, thrust comments in the faces of the unwilling and the undeserving. And whatever you do,
my face.
have a great week. We'll be back next week. But for now,
this party's over.
This party's over.
This party's over. You've been listening to The Adventuring Party. We are a devilish collective of like-minded and opinionated souls talking about Irish gaming in general, for as long or as little time as we can stand to do so. You can find us, or have already found us, at theadventuringparty.net. There you'll find show notes for the episode you just listened to, and you can find links to other places on the internet where we tend to hang out. We are on Facebook at The Adventuring Party. You can follow us on Twitter at AdventuringPTY, or if you head for YouTube, you can search for The Adventuring Party and choose the channel that doesn't look like lumberjacks. If you'd like to shout at us, then head over to speakpipe.com/The Adventuring Party and leave a short message. We will probably include it in a future episode and even address your concerns. If you want to contact us by email, send us a note to party@theadventuringparty.net. Now, this whole kit and caboodle has been released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license. I think that means you can transcribe the entire thing into a book and give it away, but not sell it. So have at it. Anyways, give us a like, give us a subscribe, please share this episode or any other episode you've liked with your friends, and we hope we'll see you back here next week. Goodbye!